She cheated on me last night. Those words feel foreign in my head, like they belong to someone else's nightmare, not my life. And yet, as I sit here, staring at the whiskey glass in my hand, I know they are the only truth that matters. Eliza. My wife. My beautiful, elegant, high-maintenance Eliza. The woman who once whispered promises of forever in my ear. The woman I built a life for cheated on me. And not just with anyone. If it had been a coworker, a friend, even a stranger she met at a bar, I could have almost understood. Almost. But no. She had to take her infidelity and twist the knife in the cruelest way possible. Because the man she chose was homeless. A drifter. A man who reeked of whiskey and piss, whose clothes were patched together with desperation, whose eyes carried the dull haze of someone long abandoned by the world. And yet, somehow, he was the one she gave herself to. I found them last night. Not by accident, no. I wasn't looking for her. I was looking for a moment of peace, a breath of fresh air after the weight of the day settled on my shoulders. But instead of peace, I found them. A shortcut through a dimly lit alley brought me face to face with my worst nightmare. There she was, my wife, pressed against a graffiti-stained wall, lips locked with a man who looked like he hadn't seen a shower in weeks. His hands, rough and filthy, clung to her waist as if she belonged to him. And worse? She let him. She leaned into him, clinging to him like he was the last thrill she had left in the world. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My legs locked in place. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. Then she laughed. Not just any laugh. A laugh I hadn't heard in years. Carefree. Wild. The kind of laugh she used to give me when we first met, back when we still believed in each other. My stomach churned. That was the moment something inside me shattered. I didn't scream. I didn't rush in like some tragic hero in a cheap romance film. I just stood there, watching as my wife, my elegant, refined, perfectly curated wife, lost herself in the arms of a man who slept on sidewalks and begged for spare change. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the blade just a little deeper, she whispered something to him. Something I couldn't hear but could feel. Something she had stopped whispering to me long ago. That was when I turned and walked away. Not out of weakness, but because I needed to know why. And I will find out. Even if it destroys me. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. The way her fingers tangled in his dirty hair. The way her lips curved into that rare, reckless smile, one I hadn't been the cause of in years. By morning, the question that haunted me wasn't what she had done. It was why. Eliza was a woman of luxury. She spent hours curating her life to appear flawless, designer dresses, the finest wine, exclusive social circles. She treated poverty like an infectious disease, something to be pitied but never touched. And yet, she had thrown herself at a man who had nothing. I needed answers. But first, I needed to pretend. When she walked into the kitchen that morning, I was already sitting at the table, sipping my coffee like it was just another day. The sight of her turned my stomach, but I kept my face neutral. Morning, she murmured, brushing her hair over one shoulder as she poured herself a cup. She didn't look guilty. Not even a little. Morning, I echoed, watching her carefully. You sleep well. Her lips curved slightly as she stirred sugar into her cup. Like a baby. I nearly laughed. A baby? A baby wouldn't spend the night pressed up against a brick wall with a man who smelled like cheap liquor and regret. Glad to hear it, I said smoothly, forcing a smile. She smiled back. A perfect, practiced smile. The same one she used at dinner parties when she pretended to be engaged in a conversation she didn't care about. I had loved that smile once. Now it just looked like a mask. For the first time in our marriage, I realized how much of her was an illusion, how much of us had been one. Eliza sat across from me, flipping through her phone, completely unaware that I had seen everything. Completely unaware that the ground beneath her was already cracking. And so, I waited. I watched. I listened. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to things I had ignored for years. The way her mood would shift suddenly, like a tide pulling back before a storm. The way she'd disappear for hours without explanation. The way she laughed too hard at nothing, as if trying to convince herself she was happy. I followed her once. Not far, just enough to see where she went when she ran errands. She didn't go to the boutique she loved or the overpriced cafe where she gossiped with her equally pretentious friends. No. She went downtown, to the part of the city she used to wrinkle her nose at, where the storefronts were covered in faded posters and the streets smelled like rain and regret. She wasn't shopping. She was looking for him. And when she found him, she smiled. Not the polite, empty smile she gave me in the mornings. A real smile. A hungry smile. And just like that, I had my answer. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. I should have confronted her right then and there. I should have walked up to them, grabbed her by the wrist, and demanded to know what kind of sickness had taken root inside her. But I didn't. Instead, I stood in the shadows, watching as my wife, my beautiful, privileged, untouchable wife, lowered herself onto a cracked bench beside a man whose very existence she would have sneered at a year ago. He was scruffy, unshaven, and wrapped in a patched-up coat that barely held together. A forgotten soul on the fringes of society. And yet, when he leaned toward her, whispering something in her ear, she laughed. Not the forced, polished laugh she gave at dinner parties. Not the fake amusement she used when her socialite friends told her another story about their personal trainers or exclusive retreats. This laugh was different. It was free. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't cheating on me because she was unhappy. She wasn't cheating on me because she had fallen out of love. She was chasing something. Something she thought she had lost. A thrill. A risk. And apparently, I, the man who had built her a home, provided her with stability, and given her everything, wasn't dangerous enough anymore. I clenched my fists as I watched her lean into him, her fingers grazing his jaw, her lips brushing against his ear as she whispered something back. How long had this been going on? Had she been sneaking out for weeks? Months? Had she lied every time she told me she was visiting friends? Had she left our warm bed in the dead of night just to find him? The rage inside me burned white hot, but I didn't move. No, I needed to see more. I needed to understand. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. 1, 2, 3. A collection of images that would become the evidence of her betrayal. Proof that my wife, who once turned up her nose at the idea of charity, who scoffed at people who wasted their potential, had thrown herself into the arms of a man who didn't even have a home. The ultimate irony. My stomach twisted as I pocketed my phone. I had seen enough for today. It was time to go home. Time to figure out my next move. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. That night, I lay beside her, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing. She smelled like expensive perfume and red wine, like the luxury she wrapped herself in every day to forget where she came from. But now I knew the truth. Eliza wanted to escape. Not from me, but from the life I had built for her. She wanted filth. She wanted recklessness. She wanted him. The irony of it all made me sick. I turned my head slightly, watching her. Her face was relaxed in sleep, her lips parted, her body tangled in the silk sheets I had worked so hard to afford. Did she dream of him? Did she imagine his hands on her instead of mine? My fingers twitched with the urge to wake her up, to shake her until she had no choice but to look me in the eye and confess everything. But no, not yet. Confrontation was too easy, too quick. I needed to know why she did this. I needed to see it for myself. The next morning, I played my role perfectly. I kissed her forehead before I left for work. I sent her a message at lunch. I even picked up her favorite flowers on the way home. She smiled. She thanked me. She kissed me with lips that had probably touched his just hours before. I almost laughed at how easy it was for her to lie. But I had my own game to play. That night, when she told me she was meeting a friend for drinks, I nodded and kissed her cheek. I didn't ask questions. I didn't let my voice shake. And the moment she walked out the door, I followed. I stayed far enough behind that she wouldn't notice me, blending into the shadows of the city. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement as she made her way downtown. She didn't go to a bar. She didn't go to a friend's house. She went straight back to him. I stood at a distance, watching as she found him in the same alley, in the same filthy clothes, with the same half-drunk sway to his step. And then she did something that made my stomach twist in knots. She pulled money from her purse and tucked it into his hand. My wife, who once told me charity was for people who didn't work hard enough, was giving him money. What was he to her? A thrill? A secret? Or something worse? I needed to get closer. I needed to hear. So, I stepped into the darkness, careful not to be seen. And when she spoke, my blood ran cold. "You'll leave soon, right?" she whispered. "You promised." He laughed, a raspy, broken sound. "You don't want me gone, sweetheart." She bit her lip, hesitating. "It's getting risky." He's smart. My heart slammed against my ribs. She was talking about me. I had heard enough. I turned on my heel and walked away, my pulse hammering in my ears. Eliza wasn't just having an affair. She was planning something. And now it was my turn to play the game. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over in my head. It's getting risky. He's smart. That meant she knew. Not that I had followed her, not yet, but she felt it. Good. She should be afraid. By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't enough to catch her. I needed to break her. I needed her to understand what it felt like to have everything ripped away. So I started small. I left my phone unlocked on the counter, something I never did. A test. When I came back from the shower, it had moved an inch. Barely noticeable, but I knew. She had checked. The next night, I left my laptop open. My email pulled up on an old work message. A meaningless detail. But when I returned, the tab had been closed. She was getting nervous. She was watching me, just as I was watching her. Good. Then, I made my first real move. I needed to know more about him. The man who had somehow made my wife crave the dirt beneath her feet. The man she was paying to stay. Who was he? I waited until Eliza left for another one of her dinners, and then I went looking. Finding him wasn't hard. He lived in the same alley where I had first seen them, curled up in the doorway of an abandoned shop, a bottle of whiskey clutched in his hand. I approached slowly, hands in my pockets, my pulse steady. His eyes flicked up to mine. Recognition flashed across his face. "You're her husband," he said, his voice hoarse from years of cheap alcohol and cigarettes. I didn't react. "And you're the man she's been seeing." He smirked. "That what you call it?" I clenched my jaw. "I want to know why." He let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Why what? Why you? Why not some rich asshole from one of her parties? Why not someone who can actually give her the life she's used to?" His smirk widened. "Because I'm not that. That's the point, man. You ever wonder why women like her get bored of guys like you? You give her comfort. I give her chaos. And chaos is addictive." I felt something snap inside me. He leaned forward, lowering his voice like we were sharing some kind of dark secret. "You want to know the real reason she keeps coming back?" I didn't answer. He grinned. "Because with me, she has nothing to lose." I took a slow breath, controlled the rage burning in my veins. And then, I smiled. Because he had just given me exactly what I needed. "You like chaos?" I said quietly. "Good. Because I'm about to ruin your life." I turned and walked away before he could respond. The real game had just begun. The thing about men like him? They think they're untouchable. They live without rules, without consequences, drifting through life with nothing to lose. That's what made them dangerous. That's what made them weak. Because a man with nothing to lose never sees the fall coming until it's too late. Step 1. Cut off the money. I started with the cash. Eliza had been paying him. That meant dependency. That meant leverage. So, I waited until she was in the shower, her phone left unattended on the dresser. I picked it up, my pulse steady, and scrolled through her banking app. And there it was. A pattern of transactions, small amounts, spread over weeks, all withdrawn in cash. She was careful not to leave a direct trail, but the numbers told the story for her. I smiled. Sloppy, Eliza. I transferred half of our joint savings into a private account under my name. The rest, I left untouched for now. Then, I changed her banking password. When she realized she couldn't access her money, she'd panic. And panic leads to mistakes. Step 2. Disrupt the pattern. The next night, when she left for her usual meeting, I was waiting. I followed her downtown, keeping my distance, watching as she navigated through the dark streets like she belonged there. She found him in their usual spot. But I had already been there earlier. I had slipped a crisp $100 bill into the hands of another homeless man, one who was more than happy to start a little trouble in exchange for free cash. I watched from the shadows as the man, tall, wild-eyed, and desperate, approached them. I couldn't hear everything, but I didn't need to. The tension in Eliza's body, the way her lover stiffened. Then, the pushing started. My hired friend shoved him hard, knocking him against the wall. My wife gasped, stepping back. A scene unfolded, one that I had orchestrated perfectly. She wasn't scared for him. She was scared of him. Good. I slipped away before they saw me. Step 3. Make her doubt him. The next morning, I played my role as the oblivious husband. Eliza was on edge. She picked at her breakfast, stirring her coffee without drinking it. Her phone stayed face down on the table, something she never did. I glanced at it casually. Something wrong? I asked, my voice smooth. She blinked up at me, startled. No, just tired. I smirked into my coffee. She was unraveling already. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Because now, it was time for the final step. It was time to make her beg for the life she had so carelessly tried to throw away. The first crack had formed. Eliza was slipping, unraveling thread by thread, and I could see it in the way her hands trembled when she thought I wasn't looking. In the way she kept glancing at her phone but didn't dare pick it up. She was waiting. For him. For reassurance. For whatever sick, twisted version of love she thought she had found in that man. But I had made sure he wouldn't be answering anytime soon. The little stunt in the alley had done exactly what I needed it to, shaken her faith. Made her see, even if just for a moment, that her so-called thrill came with consequences. And now, I had to press harder. So, I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee like nothing had changed. Like I wasn't the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. You seem distracted, I said casually. Something on your mind? Her eyes snapped to mine, wide with feigned innocence. No, of course not. Lie. She was a terrible liar when she was nervous. Work stress. I prodded. She nodded too quickly. Yeah, just a lot on my plate lately. Another lie. Eliza never brought work stress home. She thrived under pressure, wore her ambition like armor. But right now, she looked like a woman on the verge of collapse. Perfect. I gave her a sympathetic smile, reached across the table, and squeezed her hand. She flinched before she could stop herself. That was new. She was afraid. Not of me. No, not yet. But of the situation spinning out of her control. I had to bite back my own satisfaction. Step 1. Make her feel alone. Later that day, I made sure her money was still locked. I checked her bank account from my own device, still frozen, just as I left it. And then, I took it a step further. I called the bank and, as her loving husband, reported suspicious activity on her account. They locked it down completely. Eliza wouldn't be withdrawing anything for a while. She had no idea the safety net she'd always relied on had just been yanked away. Step 2. Cut off her escape route. That night, I watched her closely. She barely touched her dinner. When she excused herself to the bathroom, I saw her snatch up her phone on the way out. She was going to call him. I waited. A minute passed. Then 5. By 10 minutes, I got up from the table and quietly made my way down the hall. Through the crack of the bathroom door, I heard her whispering. Please, just answer me. I don't know what's going on. Silence. I could imagine the voicemail beep in the quiet that followed. Then, a shaky breath. She was breaking. When she finally came back to the table, I pretended not to notice the red-rimmed edges of her eyes, the way her shoulders curled inward. I just smiled at her like everything was fine. Like I wasn't the one crushing her little fantasy world piece by piece. Step 3. Keep her guessing. Over the next few days, I planted small doubts in her mind. I left my keys in the wrong place, just to see if she would notice. I set my phone down within her reach, knowing she'd check it when I wasn't looking. Each time, her paranoia grew. I didn't have to say a word. She was doing the work for me. And then, one night, I made my move. She was in bed, curled away from me, pretending to be asleep. I reached for my phone and sent a single text. To her. We need to talk. Tomorrow. 8 p.m. You know where. I set the phone down, rolled onto my back, and waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then, I felt her shift. She reached for her phone under the covers, trying to be subtle. I almost laughed. She thought he had texted her. That hope was the final thing I needed. Because tomorrow at 8 p.m., she wouldn't be meeting him. She'd be meeting me. The next evening, I left the house as if it were any other night. Eliza barely acknowledged me. She was too busy checking her phone every few minutes, waiting for a reply that would never come. Her face was pale. Her fingers twitched against the stem of her wine glass. She was unraveling, and I was about to finish what I started. I drove downtown, parking a block away from the meeting spot. It was the same alley where I had first caught her, where she had laughed against another man's lips like she had forgotten she had a husband waiting at home. Now, it was where I would break her. I hid in the shadows, my breath steady, my heart pounding with quiet anticipation. Would she even come? Yes, she would. Because she needed him. She needed the thrill, the danger, the escape from the life I had built for her. And sure enough, at exactly 7:58 p.m., I saw her. She walked quickly, her coat wrapped tightly around her, her heels clicking against the pavement. She looked around nervously, scanning the alley for him. But of course, he wasn't there. He would never be there again. I had made sure of that. I stepped forward, letting the dim glow of the street lamp illuminate my face. Eliza froze. Her breath hitched. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Looking for someone? I asked, my voice calm. She swallowed hard. What are you doing here? I took another step toward her, watching as she instinctively stepped back. You already know, I said simply. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't try to deny it. She didn't try to play innocent. She knew she had been caught. I let the silence stretch between us, let her feel the weight of it pressing down on her. Then, finally, I pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen, and her eyes widened as an image filled the display. Her. With him. Caught in the act. I turned the phone slightly, letting her get a good look at the evidence of her betrayal. She gasped softly, her hands trembling at her sides. You. I smiled. I know everything, Eliza. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. I wasn't here for apologies. I wasn't here for explanations. I was here to watch her fall. You want him so badly? I said, taking a slow step closer. You want to trade the life I gave you for this? I gestured to the alley, to the filth, to the emptiness. Then congratulations, Eliza. This is your life now. She shook her head frantically. No, I cut her off. I froze your accounts, I said, my voice cold. Every credit card. Every bank account. Every penny that was ours gone. I moved it. It's mine now. Her face drained of color. You wouldn't. I tilted my head. Wouldn't I? She was breathing fast now, her mind racing to process what I had just said. What about the house? She whispered. I let out a quiet laugh. The house. I echoed. The house is in my name, Eliza. Always has been. You won't be stepping foot in it again. She staggered back like I had slapped her. For years, she had taken our life for granted. The security, the comfort, the privilege. And now, it was gone. Every last piece of it. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. We can fix this. I raised an eyebrow. We. She nodded desperately, stepping toward me now, reaching for my arm. I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking. I was stupid. But we can fix this, can't we? I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. And then I smiled. You already did fix it, I said softly. By showing me exactly who you are. Her lips trembled. I still love you, she whispered. I leaned in slightly, close enough that I could see the panic in her eyes. No, I said. You love the life I gave you. But that life is gone. Her breath hitched. I stepped back, leaving her standing there in the cold, in the filth, in the ruins of her own choices. And then, without another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. Not when she called my name. Not when I heard the choked sob slip past her lips. Not when her heels scraped against the pavement as she staggered forward like she might chase after me. She wouldn't. She knew she wouldn't. Because what was left for her now? Nothing. She had burned every bridge. And I had made sure there was no way back. The cold night air wrapped around me as I walked away, my pulse steady, my steps unhurried. She had gambled everything, our marriage, our home, our life, and she had lost. I should have felt victorious. But as I slipped into my car, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands, a strange hollowness settled in my chest. This was what I wanted, right? To see her broken, to strip away everything she had taken for granted, to make her pay. Then why did it feel like I had burned myself along with her? I exhaled sharply, shoving the thought aside. No, I wouldn't let doubt creep in now. She made this choice. She wanted danger? She wanted chaos? Well, now she had it. And she would never get the comfort of my presence again. The fallout begins. The first message came an hour later. Eliza, please, come home. Let's talk. I didn't answer. Then another. Eliza, I don't know where to go. Just talk to me. Please. I shut off my phone. Let her feel it. Let her feel alone. The same way she had made me feel while she was sneaking off in the night, pressing herself against a man who smelled like the gutter. I slept better that night than I had in years. But by morning, the real fallout had begun. The first call wasn't from Eliza. It was from her friends. Or at least, the ones who thought they were still her friends. Hey, man. A voice I barely recognized crackled through the line. It was Patrick, one of the smug, self-important men from our social circle. I just saw something crazy. Eliza, man, what the hell happened? I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee. What do you mean? She's at Crestwood, he said, his voice lowering like he was afraid someone might hear. I thought she was slumming it for some charity thing, but dude, she looks bad. Crestwood. A rundown part of the city. The kind of place where people like Eliza never belonged. And yet, there she was. Exactly where she had chosen to be. I felt a dark satisfaction coil in my chest. Guess she needed a change of scenery, I said flatly. Patrick hesitated. So, it's true? You kicked her out? I let the silence stretch. Then, I ended the call. A harsh reality check. By noon, the texts had started again. Eliza, where are you? I need to see you. Eliza, please, I don't have anywhere to go. Eliza, just tell me what to do. That last one made me pause. Not because I pitied her, but because she finally understood. For years, Eliza had held the power in our marriage. She dictated the terms. She demanded the best. She expected me to always be there, always be her foundation, no matter how carelessly she treated me. Now, she was the one begging. Now, she was the one who didn't know what to do. And still, I didn't answer. Because there was nothing left to say. The final confirmation. That evening, I took one last drive downtown. Not because I wanted to see her, but because I needed proof that this was over. I parked a block away from Crestwood, keeping to the shadows as I walked toward the alley where I knew she'd be. And there she was. Eliza. Only this time, she wasn't visiting. She was staying. Her once perfect hair was tangled. Her expensive coat, one that once cost more than some people made in a month, was pulled tightly around her like a shield against the cold. And she wasn't alone. There were others now. People like him. The drifters. The lost. The forgotten. She sat hunched on a bench, clutching a cheap cup of coffee, her eyes darting around as if she was waiting for someone to come save her. But no one would. Not this time. Not ever again. I let the moment sink in. Then, slowly, I turned and walked away. Not with anger. Not with regret. Just with the final, quiet understanding that this was exactly what she had chosen. And I was free. The house was quiet when I returned. For the first time in years, it didn't feel suffocating. No lingering perfume in the air. No passive-aggressive sighs when I walked through the door. No carefully calculated remarks designed to make me feel less than. Just silence. Just peace. I poured myself a drink and sank into the leather chair by the window, staring out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Eliza was sitting in the cold, surrounded by the very life she had been so drawn to. And me? I had everything she had thrown away. For years, I had revolved around her, her moods, her needs, her insatiable hunger for more. But now, she had nothing. And I had freedom. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt lighter. Because for the first time in my life, I was no longer trapped in the orbit of a woman who had never really loved me. The last attempt. The days passed without another message from Eliza. Until the third night. Then, my phone buzzed. Her name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a long time before I answered. Silence. Then, a shaky breath. Please, she whispered. Talk to me. Her voice was raw. Not manipulative. Not dripping with entitlement. Just small. I have nothing left, she said. I don't know what to do. I swirled the whiskey in my glass, watching the liquid catch the light. Eliza, I said calmly. That's not my problem anymore. Her breath hitched. You can't just. I can, I interrupted. And I am. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. She had always been able to control people with her words. But not anymore. Not me. Finally, she exhaled, a long, shaky breath. So this is it? She asked. This is how it ends? I took a sip of my drink, savoring the taste before I answered. No, Eliza, I said quietly. This is how it should have ended a long time ago. And with that, I hung up. For good. Moving on. I didn't hear from her again after that. I didn't need to. Her story had already ended. Mine, however, was just beginning. For years, I had been nothing more than the man who held her world together. Now, I was the man who had let it fall apart. And in doing so, I had rebuilt my own. One where I no longer had to beg for love. One where I no longer had to wonder if I was enough. One where I no longer had to carry the weight of a woman who had never deserved me in the first place. I was free. And this time, I wasn't looking back. The absence of Eliza was deafening at first. Not because I missed her, but because for the first time in years, I didn't have to think about her. No more analyzing her moods. No more bracing myself for the next complaint. No more cleaning up the mess she left behind. Literal and emotional. The house, once filled with the sound of her high heels clicking against the floor, now held only the quiet hum of solitude. And I liked it. At first, I half expected her to show up. To bang on the door. To demand her old life back. But she didn't. Not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. She had no money. No home. No allies left to pull her out of the pit she had willingly thrown herself into. She had spent years treating people as accessories, pawns to elevate her status. And now, she had nothing left to trade. I let that reality settle over me. Let the weight of it remind me that I had won. But then, something strange happened. A part of me, the man I used to be, began to wonder, where was she now? Not because I cared, but because there was a dark curiosity clawing at the back of my mind. Had she finally given up? Or was she still out there, fighting to hold on to the illusion of power she once had? One way or another, I needed to know. The final glimpse. On a cold Friday evening, I took a drive downtown. Not because I wanted to see her, but because I wanted proof that this chapter of my life was truly closed. I parked a few blocks away from where I had last seen her and walked the streets, blending into the city's rhythm. The further I went, the more familiar the faces became, the forgotten, the desperate, the ones society ignored. And then I saw her. She was sitting on a ragged blanket in the corner of an alley, her arms wrapped around herself as if she could hold together the pieces of her shattered life. She looked small. Eliza, the woman who once demanded the world at her feet, was now just another lost soul swallowed by the streets. Her hair, once carefully styled, hung in tangled waves around her face. The coat she had once worn with effortless elegance was now streaked with dirt. She wasn't alone. A few others sat near her, lost in their own worlds, their own struggles. She wasn't special here, just another ghost among the forgotten. I took a step closer. She didn't see me at first. Her gaze was distant, hollow, fixed on something that wasn't there. Then, as if sensing me, her head lifted, and our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could see the flicker of recognition in her expression, the shock, the shame, the fear. And in that second, I saw the truth. She had thought she could survive this, that she could climb her way back up. But she hadn't. She had fallen. Completely. Utterly. And I was the only person left in this world who knew the woman she used to be. Her lips parted, but no words came. And I just smiled. A slow, quiet smile. Then, without a word, I turned and walked away. And this time, I didn't need to look back. Because this time I knew. She wasn't coming back either. I never saw Eliza again after that night. I didn't need to. The final image of her, hunched in that alley, stripped of everything she once thought made her superior, was enough. Enough to close the door on my past. Enough to remind me that justice doesn't always come in the form of revenge. Sometimes, justice is simply letting go. And that's exactly what I did. A year later, life moved forward. I sold the house, the one I had built for us, the one that had never really been mine until now. I quit my job, packed a bag, and left the city for good. No grand gestures. No dramatic send-off. Just a quiet departure from a place that had held too many ghosts. I traveled. I breathed. I lived, really lived, for the first time in years. I learned how to enjoy mornings without the weight of someone else's disappointment hanging over me. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, because there was no more Eliza to sabotage my happiness. And that was the greatest freedom of all. A familiar alley. One day, while passing through a different city, I took a walk. It was cold, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones. People hurried past, bundled in scarves and coats, lost in their own worlds. That's when I saw her. Not Eliza. Someone else. A woman sitting on the sidewalk, her back pressed against a brick wall, a worn-out blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. For a brief second, I almost walked past. But something made me stop. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a few bills, and crouched down, holding them out. She looked up, surprised. "Here," I said. Her fingers hesitated before taking the money. "Why?" she asked. I thought about that for a second. Then, I gave her the only answer that mattered. Because everyone deserves a second chance. I stood up, shoved my hands into my coat pockets, and kept walking. This time, with no ghosts chasing me. No bitterness weighing me down. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the past was exactly where it belonged. Behind me. The end. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel.